One of the biggest issues facing Christians today, I think, is we have so much teaching on how God can help you in your material life right now, like how he can help you with your finances, how he can help bless your life here. And we don't spend nearly enough time allowing scripture to give us a broader perspective of the reality that we actually live in. I mean, you have to stop and think about this. We all grow up in this material reality where kind of our sense of what's real is what we can see, smell, taste, touch, feel, right? And we know by prayer and, by these kind of moments of interacting or touching things where, God seems to move in our life, we have an awareness of the spiritual through those things. But the vast majority of people don't live with a fully formed awareness of the reality of God, the reality of angels and their interactions with humanity, the reality of the spiritual realm, and how very close it is to our natural realm, and even how interactive it is. The interesting thing is that if you consider the amount of time that we're going to live on this plane in this version of reality, because you have to think in Revelation, it says that everything's going to roll up like a scroll, and there's going to be a new heavens and a new earth. And so the time that we actually spend in the current heaven and the current earth comparative to eternity and a new heaven and a new earth, you would think we would want to spend more time understanding the new heaven and the new earth, understanding the nature of the heavenly realm, the spiritual realm. But yet we actually seem to spend a lot more time, especially in modern teaching, focused on the current heaven, the current earth, and how heaven can help us in our current problems in the current heaven and the current earth. And don't get me wrong, these are important things. We need to connect those two things. If our faith is not practical to our real life, then it's just imagination. And so we certainly need that connection. But I think to get the most out of that connection, we should be spending more time understanding how the other realm actually works, getting a full vision and view of that other realm. Think of it like if you were going to, move from whatever country you're in right now, and you're going to spend the rest of your life in a different country. It's not that the things that are going on in the current country are irrelevant or that you shouldn't attend to those things or even need to attend to those things. But I think you would spend a lot of time understanding the rules and regulations and the nature of the other country. You might maybe spend some time looking at the landscape and going, do they have mountains? Do they have rivers? What types of things are in this new place I'm going to go and live? And getting a visual of what that other place is going to be like. And so I want to take a moment and just read a passage out of Ezekiel to help visualize this new place that we're going to. And this is kind of a strange and obscure verse. And I know there's people that are going to say, oh, that's apocalyptic language. That's not literal. But regardless, this is what Ezekiel saw. When he was caught up in heaven, he saw something, and what he described is what he saw. And so even if the literal representation is not actually what it's going to look like, what we have to take away from this is he saw something that these were the best words that he could come up with from the experience that he had in his existing world to represent the thing that he was looking at. So whatever this thing was he was looking at was so profound, was so out of scope from anything that he had in his current reality, that the words that he had to use to try and describe it captured it in a way that doesn't actually make any sense rationally to our mind. And these are the kinds of things that we ought to be spending time reading about, meditating on, allowing the Spirit to help us visualize some of the realities of where we're going to spend our eternity. because it's not going to be here in this current format. Now, we will be here, new earth. So we're not going to be caught up in the clouds, just floating around in disembodied spirits, right? No, the new heaven and the new earth is where we will be, but it's new. That's the important part. It will be new. It will be different. There will be things that we will interact with, creatures that we will interact with that we don't see in this present age, in this present realm. So let me just read this to you, and I want to take a moment to kind of visualize and imagine some of the things that we're going to see to give you an elevated view, to get you out of your practical daily life for a moment and to look up and to look beyond and to see with your spiritual eyes instead of your natural eyes. So let's read this. So it says, Ezekiel looked up. That's how this verse begins. So we don't actually know whether this was a vision or whether he actually saw this with his natural eyes. The text seems to indicate that this is just what he saw, literally. But irrespective, let's read about what he saw. It says, I looked and saw a windy storm approaching from the north and a huge cloud with flashing fire. Imagine this. You have this cloud and it's flashing in a way that appears to be fire. So it's more than lightning. The cloud itself seemed to be flashing with light in a way that was closer to fire than it was to lightning. And it says the cloud is glowing brightly all around with the color of gleaming amber from within the fire. And so within the cloud, you have this kind of like tornado of flashing that has the appearance of fire. And then within it, there's a core that seems to be burning more hotly, more brightly than everything else. And whatever that core is, like just imagine a cloud that is like flashing with color. And then in the center of it, you have this deep but extremely bright light that's right in the middle of it, but it's the color of amber. So it's kind of this like goldish, bronze reddish color that's in the midst of the cloud, and it's burning so hotly, or it has this this sense of intensity that it's cutting through the flashing of the cloud. Now, inside of this cloud, there appeared to be 4 living creatures that looked like human beings, but each one had 4 faces and 4 wings. Okay, now this is important because he says, I'm looking inside this cloud and I see something that appears to be a creature that looks like a human. So whatever he saw didn't look human, but it had somewhat of the form of a human, and yet he still recognized it as something else. Something that is a creature, a created being, something that's alive, but it's not human. It has the appearance of being human, which probably means that it stood tall, had what appeared to be kind of like arms or a similar format to humanity, but it wasn't human in and of itself, and that was apparent, which is why he says it appeared to be a creature that looked like a human. Okay, so let's check out this description. He says each one had 4 faces, 4 wings. Their legs were straight with feet like calves' hooves. So they're not actually calves' hooves, but they had feet that were like calves' hooves. And they glittered like burnished bronze. Okay, so their legs and their feet are like sparkling. Okay, so you imagine this now. You've got this cloud that is flashing like fire, like a whirlwind of fire. Inside of the cloud is this gleaming amber light thing, and then within it you've got these 4 creatures that have the look of a human, but instead of being human, they're clearly creatures, and they have 4 faces, they have 4 wings, and they have glittering legs. Now, beneath their wings, they had human hands on their 4 sides. And the 4 of them had faces as wings, or faces and wings as follows. Okay, so we're now describing the faces and the wings. They touched one another with their wings. They did not turn when they moved, but each one moved straight forward. As for the appearance of their faces, they had human faces in the front. Each of the 4 had a lion's face on the right. Each of the 4 had a bull's face on the left, and each of the 4 had an eagle's face towards the rear. Thus, their faces. As for their wings, each had two that stretched upward and joined with those of the others, and two more that covered their bodies. Each living creature moved in the direction of any of its faces, in whichever direction the Spirit wanted to go. They went without turning as they moved, thus the appearance of the living creatures. Okay, so just try to get the visual of this. Imagine this like a pillar, probably be the easiest way to kind of describe it. So imagine a pillar, and on this pillar, you have an arm coming off of each one of the pillars, and you have wings coming off of each one of the pillars, and you have a face on all four sides of this pillar. And each of the faces are different. One is a human face, one is a lion face, one is I think, I can't remember what the other face was. A bull's face, and then the one on the back is an eagle's face. Now, what's weird about these things is that they don't move. They don't move diagonally, okay, but rather they seem to move almost on a grid. So in whatever direction, whichever face it is looking, is how it moves. So it kind of moves almost like side to side, back to front, like a grid. And strangely, it says that all of their movement is dictated by the Spirit. So there's a spirit that kind of dictates where they go, but they don't turn. That, I think, is the strangest part. When you kind of visualize this, you imagine it as anytime it moves in a direction, it never rotates, it never turns. It's just whatever direction the face wants to go is the direction that it goes. Okay, but this thing gets even stranger, so let's keep reading. It says, with them was something that looked like fiery coals, burning the way torches do, with the fire flashing here and there between the living creatures. So you've got these four creatures, and they're connected. Okay, so that's the first thing you got to realize is that it's not like these creatures are individually moving about, but actually all four creatures are interconnected by their wings, making sort of a square. And in the middle of the square, there's this thing that looks like almost like a torch, but it's not actually a torch. It's some kind of light or flame that is in the center of this square being made by these four creatures. All right, so let's keep reading. Okay, so then it says that the fire that was between them, it had a brilliance, and out of the fire went lightning. And so now you have, imagine these four sort of pillars with all these different faces, with these wings that are connected to one another, making this sort of open square. In the middle of the square, you've got this thing that looks essentially like a torch, and out of the torch is coming lightning. I mean, this is wild stuff. But it gets even crazier. It says, as I gazed at the living creature, I saw wheels on the ground. Wheels. Now, who knows what that actually means? Because in that time, his understanding of what a wheel is would have probably been a wooden, like just a wooden wheel that would have gone on a carriage, because they didn't have wheels like we have today. So, but whatever he saw, it had the appearance of a wheel. And so there are these wheels on the ground next to each of the four faced living creatures. So you have this sort of pillar with arms and wings and four faces rotating it. And then you've got these legs that are kind of these like calves' hooves, these like glittering calf legs essentially, and feet that look like calves' hooves. All right. And then at the base, appearing to be attached, which I'm guessing that they were probably standing on some sort of platform that wasn't visible. So they're standing in the middle of this thing of wheels, okay? And so you've got these wheels now that are at the base of whatever this creature is. And he says all four wheels looked the same. Their inner parts gleamed like beryl, and the structure seemed to be that of a wheel inside of a wheel. All right, so just imagine you've got, just think of like a wagon wheel, and then inside of it, you have an additional smaller wheel that's sort of inside, and it's gleaming like beryl. All right, beryl, if I remember correctly, I think beryl is kind of like a blue-green, but it's shining. All right, so this thing is like lit up and shining with color. So it's like a bright, like I said, I believe beryl is like a blue green color, if I remember correctly. And so you've got this like blue green gleaming that, I mean, if you said the appearance of beryl, that probably means that it had like a glossiness, almost like a glass look to it. Okay, and then he says, when they moved, they could go in any of the four directions without turning as they moved. Their rims were tall and fearsome, because the rims of all four were full of eyes all around. All right, full of eyes. So now you've got these wheels that have barrel kind of glassy appearance to them, a wheel within a wheel, and they're full of eyes, like eyeballs. Now, again, you have to remember that he is trying to capture something that he sees where he has no direct correlation to be able to describe it. So he's just using the words that he has here to best describe it. So it very well could be that he's saying that he actually saw these wheels and they looked like they had eyeballs all within them, or it could be that he's trying to describe the wheels as having some type of implement that gives it the ability to see, or that it has sight in some way. I tend to think though that it was literal eyeballs, because the word he uses here, he says that it was fearsome. When I think about wheels, it's like I can't really imagine a fearsome wheel. You know what I mean? But if I saw a wheel that was covered in eyeballs, that would be somewhat fearsome. And I think that's what we're experiencing here. He's saying that they were tall and they were fearsome because the rims were full of eyes all around. And so it says, when the living creatures moved, the wheels moved along with them. And when the creatures were lifted off the ground, the wheels went with them. And wherever the Spirit was to go, they went in the direction the Spirit wanted to go. The wheels were lifted up next to them because the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. And when the living creatures moved, the wheels moved with the former. When the former stood still, the latter stood still. And when the former were lifted off the ground, the wheels were lifted up next to them because the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. I don't even know what to say about that. That part's crazy. So the spirit of whatever these things are is somehow in the wheels. Okay, but we get crazier. It says, over the heads of the living creatures was what appeared to be a dome, glittering like ice. And so imagine you've got this sort of like bluish dome that's going over the sort of four creatures, all right? And so you got to remember, you have the four creatures that are creating a sort of square with their wings. In the midst of the square is this gleaming, flashing light that has the appearance of a torch that's firing lightning out of it. And then over the top of it, there's this sort of like bluish dome that has the appearance of ice. It gleams like ice. What that sounds like to me is almost like there's some sort of energy source in the center of it, and it's producing this sort of what do you call it? It's like a halo, almost like not necessarily a halo of fire, but like a halo of light that you tend to get whenever you've got an extremely dense power source, like fusion almost. And so you've got this dome that's like over the square space in the middle of whatever this thing is, all right? And so then he goes on. He says, under the dome, each had a pair of wings spread out straight towards those of the others, and each had a pair which covered their bodies. So that's what we talked about earlier. So these things are covering their bodies with their wings, and then they've got a second pair of wings that are connecting to one another to create the square. And then over the open square, you've got the dome on the top of it. And he says, I heard the sound of their wings when they moved. It was like the sound of rushing water, like the voice of Shaddai, like the noise of a tumultuous crowd or an army. And when they stopped, they lowered their wings. Whenever there was a sound from above the dome over their heads, they stopped and they lowered their wings. Okay, so I want you to imagine this now. You see these creatures, right? And really, the way it's described, it's almost more like one creature, because it's not really, because they're in this whirlwind thing, and there's four of them, but they're all four connected by the way that they're kind of connecting their wings, and there's this open space in the middle, and so they're not moving individually, but they're moving collectively. So you have to kind of visualize this like square of these four things, almost like they're protecting something in the middle of them. And they've got this sort of dome over the top of them that almost, it sounds like the appearance of what we might view as like fusion, like when nuclear fusion happens, it kind of creates this halo of light. And so you've got almost this halo of light over the top. And as they move about, so everywhere they go, they make the sound of like a crowd talking, but with almost like water. So you've got this like rushing, almost like if you could imagine a waterfall with a crowd merged together in one sound. That's what this thing sounds like when it moves. And don't forget the wheels on all four sides. So you got one wheel on each side forming the square are moving in whatever direction this thing is going, and it never turns. It only goes forward, backward, side to side. It never turns. Anywhere it goes, it operates like it's on a grid. Okay, so let's keep going. Above the dome that was over their heads was something like a throne that looked like a sapphire. On it, above it, was what appeared to be a person. I saw what looked like gleaming amber colored fire radiating from what appeared to be his waist upward. Downward from what appeared to be his waist, I saw what looked like fire giving a brilliant light all around him. This brilliance around him looked like a rainbow in a cloud on a rainy day. This was how the appearance of the glory of Adonai looked. When I saw it, I fell on my face, and I heard the voice of someone speaking. Oh, and I missed a really important part. The living creatures kept speeding here and there like flashes of lightning. Okay. So now I want you to kind of see all of this together. You've got these four creatures that have the appearance of a human because they've got arms, but they've got arms on all four sides. They've got wings on all four sides. They've got these legs that are sparkling and have the feet have the appearance of hoofs, essentially. They're standing, or either standing on a platform, or they just have wheels that are somehow directly attached on all four sides. The wheels are covered with what sounds like eyeballs from the way that he describes it, and they're moving at the speed of lightning. So you just have to almost like imagine whatever this thing is, like moving in like almost like phasal, like in phase. Like if you imagine like a blur, and then it's over here, and then a blur, and now it's over here, and then a blur, and now it's over here. But it moves in a grid. The thing never turns, it never rotates, it only moves forward, backward, side to side. And it says the spirit of this thing is in the wheels. And then sitting above it is this throne with someone sitting on the throne. Now, what that sounds like, if I'm to visualize it, is it sounds like a vehicle almost, where the throne is sitting on top of whatever this thing is, and it's moving about with the throne. Now, it could be that what he was looking at was the throne sitting kind of not necessarily connected to it and moving with the creature, but rather he was looking up and seeing the throne, and then the creature is moving about like beneath the throne, as though the throne is like overseeing where the creatures are moving, versus the throne like actually being attached and moving with the creatures. It's not super clear to me which one it is. I'm sure with further reading we could probably figure that out, but for the purposes of what I'm talking about right now, that's unnecessary. Now, I know that was kind of long, but I wanted to take the time to go through this because I want you guys to start getting a visual of the realm that we're connected to. This thing, whatever this creature is that Ezekiel saw, is part of the kingdom of heaven. Now, do I believe that there's an actual creature that's floating around with wheels full of eyes and four faces and everything else, or do I believe that this was symbolic? It was probably symbolic, but even if it is symbolic, Ezekiel still saw this thing. So the Lord chose to communicate to him about something that is heavenly, about a concept that is heavenly in a physical way. He showed him something that had that physical appearance, even if we're not to take this literally, if we're not going to take it and say there's actually a creature floating around with a throne above it and whatever this dome of ice and all of those things, even if we want to say that that is not a real creature that exists in the spiritual realm, we cannot ignore the fact that that is the way in which God chose to reveal whatever this spiritual concept is to Ezekiel that he was trying to reveal. Because it's not a thing where God came down and said, hey, Ezekiel, I want you to write down that there's an eagle face, and then there's a bear face or a bull face, right? That's not what it was. Ezekiel looked up and he saw this thing. He saw whatever this thing was that he was observing. That is the best description that he could give of what he just observed. And this is what we need to take hold of. What we need to start getting a broader view of the reality that we live in. We are deeply connected to the spiritual realm. Scripture teaches that each one of us has an angel assigned to us. That's biblical. Jesus said it himself. Like, process that for a minute. There is a messenger, an angel that is assigned to you as a believer, at least one, if not more. So while we very much live in a physical, tangible world where we have physical, material things that we have to deal with and that we need the Spirit to empower us to be able to deal with, we also need to have a proper view of the spiritual realm that is backing us in that effort. Remember the story? I think it was Elijah. It might have been Elisha. I can't remember. But there is this story where the prophet is in the midst of a massive army, and his assistant is afraid, but reasonably so, because they're in the midst of this gigantic army, and literally any one of them could take them out, if not all of them. And then the prophet prays that his assistant's eyes would be opened so that he can see in the spiritual realm. And when his eyes are opened, he sees that the entire army is surrounded by angels. And suddenly his fear dissipates. Why? Because he was able to see what is actually real. What he was seeing was only part of the truth. He couldn't see the entire truth of the reality that he was operating in. And that is how most of us are living. Most of us are living with a material understanding of our reality, and our eyes are not being opened to the spiritual reality that is surrounding us. And we need to take more time to read scriptures like this to allow ourselves to get a broader view of the spiritual reality that is surrounding us. That's why Paul says that in light of such a great cloud of witnesses, this is how we ought to operate. Even Paul is saying that we shouldn't be living in accordance with what we're seeing with our own eyes, but rather with a spiritual understanding of the mechanisms and the realities of the heavenly and spiritual realm that is surrounding us, that is all around us right now in this moment, that we cannot see, but is absolutely there and is just as real as this bench that I'm sitting on here. People say all the time that someone is too heavenly minded to be of any earthly good, but I would say that if you are not heavenly minded, you really won't be of any earthly good, because you will lack the sight, the ability to live by faith and not by sight. You have to have an understanding of the heavenly realm and the spiritual realm to be able to contend with the natural things that you're going to face and confront in life, because otherwise, just like the assistant, you will be afraid when you see the armies of the natural world, the circumstances of the natural world surround you. You will be overcome with fear if you cannot see the spiritual reality that is protecting you in that moment. And so I want to encourage you to take the time to go and read some of these scriptures that give a deeper view of the heavenly realm. Open your eyes to see that all throughout the New Testament that we are touching on the hem of a tapestry that is so much greater than what we understand. Paul constantly talks about the spiritual realm, saying things like, we do not war with flesh and blood, but rather with spiritual powers and principalities and the rulers of this age, this dark age that we're living in. That speaks to organized government in the spiritual world that we are contending with. It's not just like me and some little spirit right here in this moment, even though that could be the case at times. No, we are dealing with an organized governing force that we cannot see. But with spiritual eyes, we can begin to understand it. That's why scripture is so incredibly important, because what scripture does is it gives you the language of the reality, the spiritual dimension that is all around us. Without that language, your mind cannot conceive of it. That's why we need the words to be able to vocalize and to visualize this spiritual realm that is surrounding us. And so by all means, take scripture and bring it into your real natural life. Pray for the material things that you have to deal with. But remember that the answers to those prayers often may come to you by way of Daniel. where an angel is being sent to you to bring the resources, the supply, or the answer that you're looking for. Or it may come by the Holy Spirit. It could be both. But the thing that you have to remember again is that the way that things are going to come to you are coming by way of the spiritual realm to resolve the natural problems that we have. It's not magic. It's not like God just snaps his fingers and something magical happens. No, there is something that is happening in the spiritual that is connecting to the material, that is bringing about the changes that we are seeing in the material world. Even in Revelation, when all of the things get carried out in the earth, these things are all carried out by angels. These are angels coming into the earth and interacting with our material realm from the spiritual realm. And so we've got to make that connection so that our reality is not so lowered. So we're not lowering God's reality to fit within our current reality, but allowing him through the word, through the revelation of the Spirit, to elevate our understanding, our view of reality, giving us spiritual eyes to see so that we stop living as subjects of purely the material world, but recognizing that there is a spiritual realm that we have a connection to, from which we derive all of the power and the strength and everything that we need to contend with these material circumstances. This is what makes prayer powerful. And I'll leave you with this. In Romans, I believe it says that when Abraham observed his body and his wife's body being well past childbearing years, he did not release God's promise. Okay? So think about it like this. Abraham isn't just acting on blind faith or pretending as though his natural body is not well beyond childbearing years. He looked at his natural situation. He observed it. He recognized it as real. However, he did not let go of God's promise, but instead he held on to the thing that God said. He held on to the reality that God had presented to him. His natural reality said it's impossible for you to have a child. But God's reality said that you can have a child. And so he observed his natural circumstances. He didn't ignore it or pretend like it wasn't there. But while observing that, he held on to the reality of God's promise that he would have an heir. And here's what it says. It says that by trust, he was given power to give birth to an heir. And so when we have a greater understanding of God's reality and how it is interacting with our reality, by trust, not by blind faith, not by ignoring it or pretending like it's not there, by trusting that God's reality is greater than the reality that we are experiencing in this natural plane, we are given power to have an effect to force the natural realm that we are operating in to conform to God's reality. Now, to be clear, this is not manifestation. You don't get to just imagine what it is that you want and then use God's power to conform natural reality to what you desire. But relationally, if the Lord tells you something, if he promises you something, then you can hold on to whatever that promise is that he gave you until this natural reality conforms to the power of God. And sometimes it may take 5 months, 5 minutes. Sometimes it may take 50 years, right? The point isn't the amount of time that it takes. The point is, what reality are we going to live in? Are we going to continue to live as subjects to just this natural realm, what we can see, what we can smell, what we can taste, and what we can feel? Or are we going to get a deeper understanding of the reality of God, the reality of the spiritual realm, and live by the Spirit, not by our eyes, not by sight, by faith, not by sight? And then through that process, allow the power of God to be made manifest in our life to conform this natural experience that we have to match the reality of God.